This conference will now be recorded.
We're now in order. Okay, welcome to the meeting on January 27th, 2025 of the Historic Preservation Board. Josh can call the roll.
Sure. Kevin Cox?
Here.
George Lozano?
Present.
Boss Farrer?
Here.
Dwayne Eastman? And Dottie Smith. All right. We're still good for quorum, so.
Okay. Okay, consent agenda. Okay. Do I have any motion on the minutes of the last meeting on November 25th, 2024? Somebody's,
That's city clerk.
okay. Anybody?
I'll make a motion. We accept the minutes.
I'll second that.
Okay, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Motion passed. And items for discussion. Review the proposed sign at 321 South Summit Street. Go ahead, Josh, what
Okay.
you have on that?
All right. So the sign is at 321 South Summit. So today that is kind of a, let me see if I have that picture in here. Today the sign, oh no, I don't have that picture in here. It kind of looks like a marquee that's up there today, but it just has hometown rental in the middle. So it's just a box sign is all it is today. So the proposal is to have a sign that looks like this. That is a reverse slit channel letter sign. So it's not a box sign anymore. So it's actually more compliant with the guidelines than what the existing sign is. So this would be lit again, and this goes on, and this is the signboard. This up here, it's like a secondary signboard, I guess. I never could find a good picture of what that looked like in the past. I think it might have said hometown across it too. So it's just another signboard. Definitely not original. I think the lower one is probably closer to what original would be. But that red part isn't going away. I did find this picture. So this picture must have been from some Marcolala years ago. 1928 it says. And here you can see this was the Crest building. And they had this projecting sign. And then there is that red part there. Actually, I'm wrong. I forgot. The red part is where this sign here is. Let me see what that is. Oh, that's just another Crest sign. The one across this top part above the window. You can't see what I'm pointing at. So there's a sign right there.
Mm-hmm.
It says SH Press and Company.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think it used to be kind of gold looking, and I recall big gold letters back in the day.
So actually, I'm backwards. So that red section that you see on today's sign is actually where that was. And where the black part is, that's
Where they wanted it to be.
However, the sign today is actually right there too. It's right where the yellow part is.
What? Okay. Well, I'm confused because in the old picture, it looks like there's windows or something underneath.
Yeah, the black part is the windows. So they're covered up.
Oh, I see.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. The
Who
black
knows what
part
that
below. Yeah.
That could have been any time between the 20s and the 80s.
Okay. All right.
Maybe.
Mhm.
But anyways, based on this channel letter configuration, like I said, I think it actually meets the guidelines better than what the current sign is. And so I recommend that you.
I would agree. I definitely think it's an improvement. I always thought that was not a particularly attractive sign for downtown, the one they had. But a total those things that got
Well-
grandfathered in.
The location in Winfield already has this signage. It's a little bit different building that they're in there, and they don't have to deal with historic regulations, I guess, where that sign is.
So would that be, what's the word? Would that be pressed into what the black part is that right?
No, it would be lifted off of it, I believe.
Lifted up.
I don't know exactly how far off, but it's probably, a couple inches or something like that.
Yeah.
So you say this sign is not lit?
No, the new one will be lit.
The new one will
I
be
think the
lit.
current one is too.
Yes, I
Okay.
think so. I guess it's like a box sign lit from
Yeah.
behind.
Uh-huh.
It's like the old
So
white
it'll
letters.
have some kind of
Not really very attractive.
I see.
hanging, it'll be hanging like a picture, sort of.
No, it'll be flat up against the building.
Okay.
It's
okay.
just the signage itself is three-dimensional, I guess is
I
probably the
got-
way
I
to think
got
about it.
All right.
So it has depth to it.
Right, right.
Mhm.
Okay. Any discussion on that?
Well, I think that's definitely like you said, I guess definitely an improvement over what's presently there. So I would definitely approve of that.
The one thing I should mention though is notice there's actually two storefronts there. Technically, you're not supposed to do that, but the Crest store did that too.
Hmm.
So if you see that in the picture, that's clearly the entire, you can't see the
Yeah,
openings. That's clearly the entire width of that building.
right.
It just happens to have two storefronts in it.
Huh.
Technically, not.
Well,
exactly.
was Chris taking up both?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, you can tell that whole thing is taken up.
Yeah.
So there's a precedence for a sign that goes clear across.
So presently, you said there's two businesses there?
No, I don't think so. I think one of these, I think like this is probably the entrance here, and this is just like a
Okay,
service entrance or something.
I see.
Okay.
So I'll make a motion that we accept their proposal and allow them to put their sign up.
I will second that.
Okay, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Motion passed.
Okay. So the other thing that I had intended for us to do tonight is a training session. We haven't done one of those in a long time. And unfortunately, the two people that really need it aren't here, but it is what it is. What I'm going to do is, if this recording works correctly, where it actually plays the video over the recording and they can actually watch it, I'll just do that. Otherwise, I will send them the link to this so that they can watch it. But it's good for you guys too, because it's been a little while since we've done this. So, how will I do this? So I can't see what I'm doing over there. So this is a meeting before the Lawrence Historic Board, whatever they call theirs. And this is Katrina Ringler, which we've had here before. She's leading this training. It's sometime like October 17th of last year. So it's pretty recent.
Were you there?
Hmm?
Were you there?
I was not at that meeting.
Okay. I know you like to go up to the, I'm kidding.
So I'll go ahead and play this. This is like 20.
Those character defining features, and not just the building, but the site and the environment as well. So for example, putting a parking garage in a Victorian home, not going to work, right? Because it's not structurally going to work. You'd have to rip out all of the things that make it historic as a nice Victorian house. But you probably could put a parking garage in a concrete warehouse, and that would not necessarily be an incompatible use. Or in the case of this project in Wichita, you could put apartments into a parking garage and actually have front door parking in front of your apartment, which is kind of really cool. But there are some projects where You will get the sense of it as you start looking through the project, where there's just so many things that just don't fit. And at the end of the day, it may be that it is standard number one. This use does not fit this building, or vice versa. Sometimes creative design solutions can solve the problem. This is an example I use a lot. These beautiful buildings, downtown area, the one on the left, new use for a drinking establishment. Local ordinance says you cannot have transparent windows into a drinking establishment. So they could have taken the tact of replacing that original storefront with something new and modern and aluminum, but creative design solution is just cover the glass with vinyl signage clings that are compatible, and now we don't have to rip out the historic character defining elements. So it could have been the wrong use for the building or the wrong building for the use, but a creative design solution made it work. Standard number 2 talks a lot, I'm going to talk a lot about character defining features because it comes up again and again. Standard number 2 says historic character of property should be retained and preserved. Removal of historic materials or alterations of features and spaces that characterize a property should be avoided. So this is an example I found on the internet one day. I was appalled, as probably most people would be. The one on the top is the before, and the one on the bottom is the after. And, there are a few things that they kept, like those little oval windows on the second floor, but they pretty much ripped off, destroyed, covered, obliterated all of the character defining features that really made that house unique and special. And I just wanted to point out, it's not just the features. That standard also talks about spaces. And so, for example, things like a church where you have a very characteristic space on the interior, that is also something that needs to be taken into consideration and goes back to standard number 1. You could put housing into a church, but you're going to have a very large space. You can't divide it up into multiple housing units and still say that it meets the standards. This is just an example of another case where someone did not respect the character defining features of the building. At some point, this building had a metal slipcover on it, and the little pediments that stuck up above the parapet got cut off because they were sticking up above the metal. And so, that is not recommended. Standard number 3 talks about context of time. So properties are recognized as a physical record of their time, place, and use. One of, I think, the important things about historic preservation is that when we preserve buildings, they become a tangible connection with our past. And if that connection is not real, then it loses meaning and significance. So changes that create a false sense of historic development, like adding conjectural features or architectural elements from another building, are not recommended and should not be undertaken. So adding features like these, what my boss calls Buckaroo Revival shingles awnings, to make something look more old-timey is not recommended. These buildings are from either the late 19th or early 20th century. They would have never had bare barnwood storefronts or awnings on them, right? They have pressed metal cornices. They probably had brick, metal, or maybe wood storefronts, but definitely not bare barnwood type elements. So architectural styles change over time, of course. But putting something that is just conjectural, that you don't know what it looked like, is not recommended. This comes into play also sometimes where we have, let's say, a little schoolhouse that the bell tower is missing and someone wants to put it back, but they don't know what it looked like. They're not even sure where it was on the roof. And unless there is good documentation and historic evidence, then we don't recommend that because it ends up being conjectural and it could be false. Historic changes, most properties, of course, like we said, change over time. Sometimes those changes acquire significance in their own right, and in those cases, that should be preserved. This is an example of a department store in downtown Hutchinson. The original department store was built in the 19-teens, and it had a very ornate brick facade with like swags of terracotta ornamentation on it. It was remodeled in the 1950s, and all of that was shaved off, and that black window in the middle was basically cut into the facade. And it was modernized inside and out for the 1950s department store. And so even though we know what that looked like from the 19-teens, we have photographs, we would not recommend someone restoring it back, because then it would be not authentic anymore. They basically would have to recreate that facade out of new materials. And so this facade is authentic to the 1950s and still matches what the interior looks like. Standard number 5 talks about, again, recognizing historic features and preserving those. It talks about distinctive features, finishes, and construction techniques, which goes a little bit further. And it also talks about examples of craftsmanship that characterize a property. So this is an example of pretty much the only house that's left on Wyatt Earp Boulevard in downtown Dodge City. It's been converted into a coffee shop. And as you can see, they've done a pretty sympathetic rehabilitation. The little drive-through window on the back, the ramp going up to the craftsman porch. That's me doing work in what would have been the living room, but you can see back into the kitchen where there's a pass-through window. Down the hall where the spare bedrooms were is where the bathrooms are. They've kept the original windows, the siding, everything about the house that says this is a craftsman bungalow house. But it's a coffee shop, which is really cool. So going along with that, just to note, there are tons of resources on the internet, especially through the National Park Service. The preservation briefs are one of our biggest go-tos. They also have what they call interpreting the standards bulletins on their website. And so this is where we go a lot of times when we are trying to struggle with, we were talking earlier about maybe a swimming pool in a property. And it's like, well, let's go to the standards. Let's go to those guidelines, those green booklets that I handed out to you. Those are also available online with illustrations. And working through and seeing if there's something similar. They are set up with sort of recommended and not recommended, do's and don'ts. And so you can work through those to kind of get a sense of what is recommended under the standards. Standard number 6 is the big one that I think most of us are aware of, and a lot of people who have historic properties have at least a sense of. But I want to just point out that it is a 3-step process, and you don't always necessarily get straight to step 3. This standard talks about repairing first, and then replacing only when it's necessary, and then if you do have to replace to match. So deteriorated historic features should be repaired rather than replaced. Step 1. So anytime someone is coming to the Preservation Commission with a recommendation to say, I need to replace my windows, okay, stop. First of all, why can't you repair the historic windows? Maybe they don't have historic windows. Maybe they're really rotted out, falling out of the building. Okay, now we're going to talk about replacement. Does the replacement match the historic? So if there is a historic window that is beyond repair and you want to replace it, how well does this visually match? It talks about matching design, color, texture, and other visual qualities, and where possible, materials. So materials are the least important of those visual characteristics. Replacement of missing features, where if you don't have the historic windows, need to be documented by substantiated by documentary, physical, or pictorial evidence. So again, we're trying to not put conjectural features back in a building. We want to make sure that there's good evidence, or at least having a educated plan based on the style of the building and the age of the building and that kind of thing. Remember that building? So going back, restoring missing features based on historic photos. In this case, they did have historic photos, but then they also just had the physical evidence of there obviously used to be pediments there, right? Standard number 7 is probably the other standard that a lot of people know, even if they don't know that they know. They probably know that you shouldn't blast a historic building. Gentlest means possible when you're trying to clean a historic building. Chemical and physical treatments that cause damage should not be used. And yes, that top one, that is brick dust that's on the ground, which is not a good sign. Surface cleaning of structures, if appropriate, shall be undertaken using the gentlest means possible. And the if appropriate is important because it's not always appropriate to clean a 100-year-old building. Basically, we recommend that cleaning is something that you look at when either the dirt is causing harm, like it's actually damaging the structure, or like in the case of the State House, we're doing it because the repairs we're going to be making need to adhere to the historic materials and need to match the color. So we want to make sure, as you can see in that bottom, they do test patches to see what kind of cleaning would be the least destructive, most gentle, and would be the most effective and also cost effective for the project. Standard number 8 gets overlooked quite a bit. I will admit that I sometimes forget about it, but it has to do with archaeology. We don't want to forget that there are archaeological deposits under our feet, some very, very ancient and prehistoric, and some of them relatively new. So it's just something that when we are talking about projects that we're digging up something, like a new street project is going on in Topeka this last year. They were doing a downtown street project. They found trolley tracks, and everybody was very excited about it. So if resources are disturbed, sometimes mitigation measures need to be undertaken, and sometimes that mitigation is just having an archaeologist come and extract the resources out of the ground so that they're not damaged and so that something can be learned from them. I think the depot here in town is a great example of that, where the project that was restoring the depot, there was some archaeology that happened, and I think there's still an exhibit there, right?
Well, it's not there anymore.
It's not there anymore, but there was one. So now we're going to get down to standard 9 and 10, which are the two at the end, and they are both similar and related. They both talk about new additions, exterior alterations, new construction that's happening to a historic property. You don't want to destroy the historic materials that characterize the property. So again, that characterize the property, character defining features are super important. If we haven't defined those already, then we don't know what's going to damage them. So we have to do that first. New work should be differentiated from the old and compatible with the massing size, scale, and features. So it sometimes can be a fine line to balance between differentiated and compatible. This is an example, again, in Hutchinson, where obviously, I'm going to say the 1980s, I'm not sure when, but someone decided to take out the storefront. They left the cast iron columns, which is very nice, but they put this interesting recessed storefront in. Differentiated, definitely. Compatible, not so much. But when new owners were doing an overall rehab of the building, they wanted to do something better and they wanted to meet the standards. And so the storefront on the left took some cues from historic photos and they did a compatible storefront. Now, it is aluminum, it is modern glass. It is not exactly to the proportions and dimensions of the historic photos, but it is definitely compatible with the historic building, and it's differentiated to the point where no one is going to necessarily mistake it as an original storefront. Then we also talk about new construction. So for example, infill within a historic district. You guys had that on your case tonight where there's a new building happening next to an older building. Is it compatible? Is it differentiated? You were talking about the windows, the 3 windows versus the 2 windows, and what is the balance between, does it meet the standards, but we don't necessarily like it? So, there is a line sometimes between differentiated and compatible that sometimes doesn't mean we like it, but it does technically meet the standards. Standard number 10 is specifically about new additions and adjacent or related new construction, and making sure that the way it is built and designed and attached will make removal in the future so that it doesn't damage the historic property. And so we kind of call this the hyphen standard, because when we're doing addition to a historic property, we want to minimally touch that historic property whenever possible. So this is a Carnegie Library in Lincoln where there was thankfully room to the back of the building to put an addition on, and the addition just minimally touches the back of the building where it has the least amount of character defining features. The addition is lower and brought in from the sides so that it doesn't show from the front of the building. If it was removed in the future, yes, there would be some damage to the back of the building, but it's the back and it would be fairly easy to repair that. You see there's 3 windows on the back of the building. There's not a lot of ornamentation. It would be easier to repair that than the side. And it also is compatible but differentiated in style. There's some similarities. Obviously they use stone, the hipped roof, the red roof material, but the windows are different and some of the other things, elements of it are different that no one's going to mistake it for being original. Some other examples, just happens to be another Carnegie Library with a large addition on the back, but again, it's stepped back, it's attached with a hyphen. They've used stone, but in a different sort of texture to keep it differentiated. These examples maybe are not so compatible. They're differentiated, but they also are glommed on to the side of the historic building and would create a lot of change and damage if someone was trying to remove them. I love the one on the bottom. They tried to do 2/2 narrow windows, but it's on like this real weird mansard roof instead of the Italianate. I don't know. And I don't know if this comes up a lot in Lawrence. It's come up in other communities, but rooftop additions, same concept. It needs to be, compatible but differentiated, attached minimally. But then you also add the impact of the visual impact of them being so tall on the roof and above, looming over the historic building. So usually we don't recommend these on anything less than a 3-story building, and setting them back as far as possible to make them not visible. Same thing with other rooftop elements like solar panels, to set them back and keep them low to the roof line. Just as an example, another little case study for you guys to look at before we kind of wrap things up. Manhattan, historic Duckwalls building, contributor to their downtown historic district. Very unassuming building, not a lot of character defining features, right? Very plain. This is the proposal that was sent to us. This purple on the right was a rooftop addition that was proposed. And I don't know if you can see down the way, that large brick building is, I think, the Wareham Hotel, and then you can see the marquee for the Wareham Theater. That's the tallest building in downtown Manhattan, and this would have been like tall. And so the recommendation from the SHPO as well as the Preservation Commission was that is way too tall for basically a 1-story building, 1.5 stories or so. And so we looked at proposals that brought that down It was going to be a restaurant and bar, and they still wanted to have a rooftop element. And so elevation drawings can be a little deceptive because you're kind of looking straight at the building, not really perspective like you would see from the street. But they could show us that they were pushing that back at least 20 feet, I think. And this was a rendering, and we kind of were like, okay, it's definitely better. In reality, you probably aren't going to see it as much as you would in this rendering. And we kind of forgot to look at the Christmas lights there. So, and that's something that sometimes gets forgotten about, because the ultimate way it was built, you can't see the addition at all, but you can very much see the umbrellas and the Christmas lights. And I've seen other projects where they have, palm trees and things, and it's like, I appreciate your comments, Brenna, today, where you're talking about the planters. Those are things that sometimes we overlook, that, it's not part of the construction or the architecture of but it's part of the site that can impact it. This is just a slide to kind of get your, feeling for which one of these do you think is a compatible new storefront for a downtown commercial property? Top right. Maybe hard to see. So the top right is a tax credit project, I think in Salina. You kind of look at the bulkhead, the large display windows, and the transom level. That is when we don't know what the historic storefront looked like in sort of an early to mid 20th century building. That's probably what we recommend. The other two are what we see a lot proposed. And they're missing that bulkhead. They're missing the display windows, or the bulkhead is glass. They have 2 or 3 transoms. And so that is something to kind of keep an eye out for if you're doing especially commercial reviews in like the downtown. We see a lot of the one on the top left is Topeka. So you'll see a lot of those. Dark metal, dark glass, which creates a sort of a closed off storefront, which is not historically characteristic. So just to kind of wrap it up, I wanted to reiterate, this is an example of those interpreting the standards bulletins that are available on the National Park Service website. I wanted to also put in a plug for Gwen and the Historic Preservation Fund grants that we do every year. Lawrence has at least one grant right now, right? And then LPA also has a grant happening currently, but there is an application round every year, and those applications are usually.
I think we'll cut that off because she's kind of talking about Lawrence in particular. And at the end of this meeting, I'm talking about a Historic Preservation Fund grant that we are applying for. So we'll cut that off. So I don't know if we really want to use this site, but I put together some packets. I think all of these have. Yeah. So all of these have those standards in them. I know it's been a while since we really looked at the actual books. And so I thought I would give you all some of those. I think I put one of the walking tour brochures in there too. I still have a bunch of those. So, not that they haven't been popular, it's just like, we have a bunch of them. I think the rest of this is just extras. So I brought this with the hopes that somebody else would hear it, but so I just wanted to take a few minutes just to have us discuss, and I
Well,
There you go. Now you can see.
good with life. Yeah.
Sorry about that. Did anybody have any questions about any of those standards that she just talked about?
Um,
So if you have this thing, page 6 is where it lists all 10 of them. This book goes over a little bit more than that. And of course, there's a few of these that we never actually look at. Like we've never, in the whole time that I've been over this board, we've never looked at anything related to archaeology. That usually doesn't come before you. And the only archaeology project that we've had is at Sanoa, which is obviously very careful. They're going through the proper procedures and everything. But we have not discovered any archaeological remains except at the truck stop. The truck stop, however, did have, so the state historian required them to have somebody on site while they were doing their grading. They didn't find anything during the grading that was of any significance, so they were allowed to proceed with their project. But there was somebody monitoring it the whole time they're doing it because that was in kind of the Etzanoa zone. And when they first, of course, there'd been some studies in the field around there, and when they first did some of those, there were some shards and stuff. However, with that being agricultural field for pretty much his entire existence, some of that just gets churned up, and who knows where it came from.
Yeah.
So ultimately, they didn't find anything. But that was an example of looking at the so that'd be number 8, looking at those significant resources and making sure that if you got to disturb it, that you have to take special measures. So if they had found something on that site, they would have had to have done something to mitigate it. And probably it would have been up to the tribe about what to actually do.
So when they built the bypass, was there excavations going on?
Yes. Yep, very much so. My wife could clean thousands with other people, clean thousands of stuff.
Uh-huh, yeah,
And they found tremendous number of it.
right.
My understanding is there's actually partial human remains that remain under the roundabout. They
Still?
chose to, the tribe chose to have those remain in sight. So
And they
there's
had-
some cases when that's all you do. You just, well, you can't dig there. You just,
Right.
now that's part of the levee system. So it was already built way up anyways. So, it's,
My wife was part of
That
a
body is gonna be fine.
ceremony that the Wichita tribe came down
Oh,
and
yeah.
did with them.
interesting stuff. The other thing that's in here, so she just hit those 10 standards hard and heavy real quick. But the other thing that's in this particular book is the recommended, not recommended. You might have noticed every once in a while when I do my staff report, I will put in exactly what these things say. Storefronts in particular are really easy to do that with because even that last one that she showed where there was an example of different ways that people had chosen to change the storefront or bring it back to what they thought it might be. The one on the bottom was not compatible with the historic district, or that's what was said, that it wasn't generally compatible with the district. And so there was a couple other examples up there where it doesn't exactly look like a historic building. Maybe it shouldn't have looked like a historic building. But they did little things to make it a little bit more compatible. So the sign we reviewed today, we even had this discussion. We don't, I mean, we kind of did see what the original signage looked like because we had that historic picture, which was nice, very unusual. I don't typically find photos like that. That was a photo from a book that Heather Ferguson had done And she had found that picture. That's the great thing about our Arkalala parades is pictures get taken a lot of the downtown buildings as a result of those. And so if you have those archives, the newspaper could probably help us quite a bit with that too, if we ever needed it.
Taken a lot, and also,
You probably have taken quite a few too.
I'm not gonna say that. Anyway,
Annual snapshot.
But the good thing is that means that some of these buildings that otherwise we have no information on, you can at least see something. Like that obviously was not supposed to be a picture of the Crest building. It was a picture of the whatever
Right.
activity, the band or whatever was going downtown. But you could see it in the background. So I try to find pictures like that when I can, because usually the owner has no idea. They don't have a clue about what the building looked like before. They don't have any evidence because it's just been lost to time. I use my house as an example. So I live in that big house across the street from Roosevelt School. And so I was even considering having it listed because it has a lot of the features. However, it has been changed so much and I don't have a good timeline for it. And so I never fully pursued it. There was a time I found a whole photo. I went to Facebook, one of those Facebook groups, one of the better ones, that actually had found some people that had regionally owned it, had lived in it. And I found a picture from what I'm assuming is probably the 20s, maybe even a little earlier, probably a little earlier, that had a wraparound porch. Well, if you look at my house today, there is no wraparound porch. It is long gone. And I've also seen evidence in the building or in the house where the stairwell used to be to get up to the second floor. If you're up on the second floor, there's a closet underneath the attic stairway. And you can see the sides where there used to be stairs. Just the outside of it. The stairs are gone. And now the stairs are moved to an addition that must have probably happened in the 20s or 30s. So it's an interesting house. I love it. It's still got some of the cool features to it, but it was altered significantly. And so the thing about it is we looked at, which standard was that? The one about not creating a false
sense of history.
sense of history. That's actually that's not even the one I'm thinking of. The one where she talked about the Pegues building, where the slip cover had been placed on the building, 50s probably. And so now that slip cover is actually historic. And so at my house, that wraparound porch, yeah, that's historic, but the current configuration is what's newly historic because it's been there, again, I don't know exactly, probably 100 years. Based on what I've seen, it's probably been there about 100 years, maybe 90-ish. I found a picture of not the original owner, but probably the second owner standing on the porch that's currently there today, and it looks like it's probably from the 30s. So I don't know exactly when that happened, but it was probably that family that switched it. I just like to use that as an example because that's the kind of thing that we would look at today. So the house today had that wraparound porch, and I came to you wanting to close it all in and move the porch around. You would have to look at that standard to see if what I was proposing was actually compatible with the house. It wasn't going to mess it up. And you'd probably say absolutely not. Because it changed that house so much that it wouldn't match its historic character. So that's the kind of thing that we look at. It seems like the majority of the things that come before you are signs, which aren't the most fun thing to look at. But we also occasionally have some storefront modifications. So just another example, I think it was the last meeting that we had when Angels in the Attic came and they were talking about their frontage there and putting those plaques or whatever in it. So I met with them again today and we were kind of talking about how they actually make that happen. And we were talking about things like, well, you got to still leave the window there, but you can go ahead and repair it because it needs repaired. And you can cover it up. It's all about being able to reverse.
Right.
it's still, and we discussed this at length at the last meeting, it's still not the most appropriate thing that they're wanting to do the building, but they're doing enough things to satisfy us that we can determine that it's not going to damage the character. There's already been damage to that building that can't really be undone. And so we're trying to make the best of it. They actually are very interested in doing everything they can to not make it worse, including some masonry repair and kind of redoing the front of it without removing a whole bunch of stuff. And they were asking me questions today, even about what they can do with certain parts of it and still be okay with. And I was able to basically answer.
Is that what, I'm just curious, is, okay, I mean, I think historically, can I just be real blunt?
Go for it.
Go back 20, 30 years ago, but I mean, one of them is my classmate who owns one of the buildings. I'm not going to say which one. But they got real mad at Topeka for saying you have to do this and, you know, without considering the money or anything. But I've noticed that the people who've come before us, they're always, like Angel, yeah, they're always willing to do, you know, the best they can.
As long as they're being
Is
reasonable.
that the way it is now, or is it you still have these problems with people coming up to you? And
I haven't had a lot of issues because, and the thing is, most of the time you are seeing those people that we're talking to.
Yeah.
I haven't had any that it just like stomped out of my office because they're upset they had to do something. I've had people do that, but not about historic stuff. And most of the time they're like, okay, well, I guess we'll go before that board and see what they have to say. And you guys are very reasonable. And I've never, I mean, I submit minutes and stuff from our meetings. We still have to do that. They actually could see our videos if they chose to watch them too. So, and I've recorded, with the exception of that last meeting not having any audio, every other meeting that we've had in the last several years, it's been recorded and put up on YouTube. So anybody could watch them. And I haven't had any pushback from anything that you guys have done. But this is part of why I wanted to, you know, look at that video and just to remind everybody about what the standards are, where to find them. So this site that I have up, and I'm not really going to look at it because you guys have the papers there. But this site has all the different standards. So you have to remember too, we usually look at rehabilitation. That's generally what we're seeing. But there's also preservation. So you're trying to preserve from being even worse. We have restoration, which I would argue a lot that the Burford did was restoration, not so much rehab, because they were having to repair, but they were also doing some reconstruction where they didn't have the element, but they knew what it looked like. Maybe they had a picture or something and they were able to recreate it. And without creating a false sense of historic character. Because they had evidence that it was there and they went to the trouble.
yeah,
Most people aren't going to do that,
Yeah.
but in the case of a theater, there was a little more work. She talked about the state capitol building. Another example of something missing off of that building, we're going to try to recreate it so it comes back to where it was before, because it's worth it on such a significant building. If you've never been into that building, you should do it. I was actually up there the first time on last Thursday. I met with some legislators, but the building itself is just really amazing. Has lots of cool features to it. So if you ever have a chance, go check it out. And besides that, you need to pick on the legislator once in a while. I didn't actually see ours. I was talking to some other ones. Anyways, did anybody have any questions about the standards? Like there's something we've said or done maybe that you didn't agree with? I mean, you must have agreed with it. You voted for it. But is there anything that I could do better about making sure that everybody understands the standard.
If you've done a good job.
What I would actually like someday is to bring her here and do the same presentation in person.
Yeah.
But what happens is every year I do a certified local government CLG report. And one of the things that we're supposed to do is have some kind of training every year.
Mhm.
And that's difficult because you guys, your time's important and we really only meet once a month. So it's hard to get that together. So I was told about this video and I thought, why not? This is a fairly easy way to just hit it real good. And we've got our training for the year. And we didn't fake it. I mean, we actually watched the video and we've had this discussion. So.
Sure. Now, when I got that Stone Arch Bridge, the Snyder Bridge on the National and State Register, she was really helpful. And I sure appreciated her input and guidance of how to go through that whole process. So, it was really good help. And she, good person to have help you too.
And see now, the good thing is, so the county decides they want to repair that bridge or replace it, then they'll, if they're using any kind of funds, which they probably will be, have to go through that review and that's going to be flagged. So while there's not generally funding available to rehab it, like you probably wish that there was, there is still a protection in place that'll prevent just absolute destruction of it.
And the county did put up several signs limiting truck traffic. And that was my major concern in the first place. You have big rigs with an excavator on the back, going down the road, 80,000 pounds. The bridge just wasn't made to handle that kind of stuff.
And actually, even if they needed to, like there was something in the neighborhood they needed to go to, the way your road is set up, you could just go the other way. So even that situation, they don't have to use it.
Yeah. And I'll tell you what, I've chased a lot of them down, but haven't seen so many anymore. But so I think the signs really did it. Any truck driver usually respects the load limit sign.
Yeah, they don't want to have a problem. If it just happened to fail, they don't want to be the one that caused it to fail because first of all, they're going to lose their load, most likely. So that's not good. Anyways, any other questions or concerns and before we move on to something up front? Okay. Well, again, you've got these packets, so I would encourage you to take some time when you have a chance and just flip through that and refresh yourselves. And I would just note that this, again, is on the National Park Service website, so nps.gov. And I don't know the exact way to get to that. Oh, it's called, okay. So it's called Technical Preservation Services. It's the name of this section of the NPS site. Anyway, so that is all I have for that, but I did have one more item that I wanted to talk about before we go home. And that is that Historic Preservation Fund grant. I'm just going to come over here. So at the last meeting, we talked about applying for that grant in order to revise the downtown district. There's a number of buildings in it that have been demolished over the years, and there's a few buildings that may be newly eligible. And so that's why I brought that back up, and you guys supported what I was doing. So I took that to the city commission last Tuesday. They supported the application. I didn't have any issues with it. And I purposely also, within the resolution that they passed, I got permission granted for this building, the police department, and Ben Gibbons Park to be listed or added to the district. If that turns out that fits like our consultant. So what I proposed was to hire a consultant, because we'll need one. I don't know how to do that stuff. And we'll probably come back and forth. We'll probably have the we'll definitely have the consultant before you guys, probably several times, depending on how that all works. We have the capability to do the go-to meetings, so we could just have them come into meetings over that too. So there's definitely some different options. But anyways, I'm working on applying for that grant. I've had a crazy week, so I haven't finished that process, but I got to it today. I started working on some of the paperwork today. So I'll get that submitted as soon as I can, and I will keep you in the loop about whether or not we are awarded it. I really have no doubt that we'll be rewarded the grant or awarded the grant. Our biggest issue will be to find the consultant. So our consultant that did the previous project has since retired. I attempted to get in touch with her, but she's kind of purposely ignoring new requests because she wants to retire. I get it.
She's a lot of fun.
We'll have to find a different one. And so in the grant, I'm going to apply for $25,000. Now that sounds like a lot of money, and it probably is. But I wanted to shoot for the moon to make sure that we get what we need. And one of the selling points before the city commission and the finance department was that we should not have a cash match. So that means we have to do in-kind services like we did with the walking tour, my time, your time. And actually with that one, we had quite a bit from Andrew as well. That was helping us. So we had lots of stuff. And if we don't have enough match because we're a CLG and because the SHPO usually has extra funds that they're trying to divvy out, there's a good chance that they will make up for any shortfalls that we have. So we don't have to pay. But I'm hoping again that it's not $25,000. I just couldn't get any of the consultants to really give me a good number. In fact, I had one that was higher than that. And I'm like, I don't know that you fully understand what my project is. And of course, I'm not showing them an RFP because all I was doing is asking them for a ballpark figure to shoot for. And SHPO was like, well, yeah, that's fine. Apply for what you get, and we'll go from there. So,
So you have contact, you have kind of reached out to a few people.
yeah, I just haven't had a ton of response. But I think when it's actually an RFP, we'll be more likely to pick up somebody. There's several in the Kansas City area. There's also national ones that I could send it to if I'm not getting any bites. It's just that might increase the cost. If it's somebody out of Chicago or something, they're going to charge us more because they got to
Probably a
travel.
good one in Kansas City, I think.
But I'm shooting for somebody in the Kansas City area.
Yeah.
There's at least Rosen Preservation, I think, responded to our original one back in 2017. I've kind of got them in the loop. I'm kind of hoping for them because they should be somewhat familiar with the project because they've been on it. It's a big organization now. That's like a multi-state firm, but they're based out of Kansas City, or we have an office in Kansas City. So anyway, that's really all I have for you.
What was that name of that company we were just talking about?
Rosen Preservation, Rosen or Rosen. I think it's actually been merged, and it may not even be called that anymore. But Elizabeth Rosen is still with the firm. So I think that would still help. We can get her attention at the very least.
Yeah.
Anyways, I have all the information for you, and you can do that.
Thank you. Okay, any other business for the board? Have a motion to adjourn?
I motion that we adjourn for the evening.
Then I'll second that.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
We are adjourned.